On my 25th birthday, I awoke with a heavy heart. I prepared a simple breakfast, the usual fare for Victor and Lucas, each bite feeling like lead in my stomach. As they were leaving, I found a sliver of courage. "It's my birthday today," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "Could you both come home early, perhaps?" I knew how foolish I sounded. Today was also Emma's birthday, the woman who held Victor's heart captive. To even suggest he choose me felt like a profound act of self-degradation. Still, the words escaped. Yesterday, in the sterile white of the hospital room, my grandmother's hand had trembled as she clutched mine. "Live, Jessica. Choose yourself for once." Her words echoed now, a fragile shield against the inevitable disappointment. I clung to the car window as they pulled away. "Just for dinner," I pleaded, my throat tight with unshed tears. "Please, just one evening." Victor's face remained an unreadable mask. Lucas, bless his heart, looked confused, glancing between his father and me. Then, the engine roared, and they were gone, leaving me standing in the cold morning air. They hadn't outright refused. A flicker of pathetic hope ignited within me. All day, I meticulously planned a celebratory meal, buying Victor's favorite steak and Lucas's beloved cartoon-shaped pasta. I even braved the florist, choosing delicate white lilies, Grandma's favorite. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, my grandmother carefully unwrapped a gift from her worn handbag, a small, intricately carved wooden train for Lucas. "He'll be here soon, won't he?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the front door, a hopeful light in her fading eyes. I urged her to eat, but she stubbornly refused. "A birthday is for family, darling. We must wait for them to celebrate together." 7 p.m. became 8, then 9, then 10. The aroma of the carefully prepared food began to turn stale, the lilies wilting slightly in their vase. My hope dwindled with each passing minute. Finally, I dialed Victor's number, my hands shaking. After several agonizing rings, he answered. A cacophony of laughter and music blasted through the speaker. "Yes?" Victor's voice was curt, bordering on annoyed. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Grandma is here. Please, just come home for a little while. It's my birthday. I'm begging you." "Jessica, really?" he sighed, a weariness in his tone. "Don't you understand? Tonight is Emma's birthday. Don't try to spoil things." Of course. Emma. The constant, the North Star of his existence. And me? I was merely the obstacle in her path. I stood paralyzed, the phone clutched to my ear, watching my grandmother through the glass doors of the balcony. Her face was etched with concern, her eyes filled with a weary sadness that mirrored my own. I was failing her. "Victor, the cake is amazing." Emma's voice, bright and melodic, floated through the phone. "Lucas wants the first piece, silly." Then came my son's innocent voice, a dagger to my heart. "Thank you, Auntie Emma. You're the best. I wish you were my real mommy." My breath caught in my chest, a sharp, agonizing pain that stole the air from my lungs. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. "Jessica," Victor began, his voice hesitant, almost apologetic. But I couldn't bear to hear another word. I slammed the phone shut, desperate to silence the sounds of their joy, their family. I forced a smile as I returned to the living room, meeting my grandmother's worried gaze. "They're busy, Grandma," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Victor has a late meeting, and Lucas has extra tutoring." She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a knowing sadness. She reached for my hand, her touch frail but firm. We sat side by side, forcing bites of the birthday cake. The sweetness was overwhelming, cloying, a pathetic mockery of celebration. The soft light illuminated her silver hair, making her look even more fragile. She took my hand and said, "Jessica, darling, you deserve to be happy. Always remember that, okay? Your strength, you have so much of it inside." Her voice faded, a slight rattling sound escaping her lips. Then, she began to cough, a deep, racking cough that shook her entire body. The hand that had been resting on mine went limp, the life seemingly draining out of her in an instant. As paramedics rushed Grandma into the chaotic emergency room, I sank into a hard plastic chair, my body numb with shock and despair. The harsh fluorescent lights seemed to amplify the hollowness inside me. My phone buzzed with a notification, another post from Emma's perfectly curated social media. This time, it was a short video montage, highlighting the seemingly idyllic happiness I craved, a family unit forever out of my grasp. Lucas's delighted laughter filled the air as he shrieked, "Happy birthday, pretty Emma." He leaned in and planted a kiss on Emma's cheek, his innocent gesture twisting the knife in my heart. The camera panned too. Victor, usually so stoic, now with a playful smear of cake on his face, his eyes sparkling with genuine affection. He could be happy, a bitter voice whispered inside my head. Just not with you. Seeing this Victor, the jovial and loving father and partner, was like uncovering a secret facet of his personality, a facet carefully concealed from me for years. This glimpse of his true self, while seemingly joyous, felt like a betrayal. Fatigue washed over me, an overwhelming tide of weariness that threatened to drown me. I powered off my phone, plunging into the welcome darkness. The emergency room's red light burned incessantly, a persistent, agonizing glow that symbolized my helplessness. Tears blurred my vision, and I succumbed to sleep on the unforgiving bench. My dream propelled me backward, to the year I was dragged into their world, a 17-year-old girl ill-equipped for the life thrust upon her. I saw Victor at 17. He stood at the top of the grand staircase. He looked at me curiously, his eyes filled with a hint of pity. "It's cold here," he said softly, draping a cashmere throw over my shoulders. "Come into the living room. It's warmer." But before I could utter a thank you, Emma materialized, her face streaked with tears. She knelt before me, her voice trembling with forced remorse. "Please forgive me, Jessica," she sobbed. "Everything I have belongs to you. I'll gladly give it all back." From that moment on, compassion transmuted into coldness. The warm, comforting glow in his eyes was replaced by a frigid disdain. "Ma'am," a nurse's voice jarred me awake. "We did everything we could. I'm so sorry. You can say your goodbyes now." Leaving the hospital felt like floating through a dream, disconnected from reality. The funeral home, the endless paperwork, the hushed whispers, it all felt like a play, performed by actors who didn't quite understand their lines. The weight of my grandmother's absence pressed upon me, a leaden cloak dragging me down. It wasn't until the crematorium worker began to push her towards the roaring furnace that the full impact hit me. The shroud was lifted, the flickering flames illuminating her face. Her eyes, closed in eternal sleep, were etched with a peaceful serenity that I would never know again. My last thread was gone. Clutching the urn close, I arrived home. The place felt desolate, an empty shell echoing with silent memories. The housekeeper eyed me with cautious curiosity. "Mrs. Victor, you're back early. I thought Mr. Victor and Lucas left for their trip." The trip. The annual father-son excursion that mysteriously always coincided with Emma's birthday. My anger bubbled inside me, but the exhaustion outweighed the rage. I packed a small bag, filling it with the bare necessities, a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, my grandmother's favorite shawl. Standing in the villa's entryway, I stole a final glance. The grand staircase, the opulent chandeliers, the carefully curated artwork, none of it held any beauty for me. Memories of the first night filled my mind. It was my wedding night, ruined by Emma's carefully orchestrated phone call. "Victor, they kidnapped me," she wailed, her voice laced with hysteria. "They threatened to hurt me if you didn't come." Victor's eyes turned as dark as a stormy sky. "Jessica, I have to go. Emma needs me." He left in a flash, his love for me a mere afterthought. I sank into the shadows, the silence suffocating me. My world was about to unravel, but I could do nothing to stop it. A car horn blared, snapping me out of my reverie. The taxi driver was waiting, his patience wearing thin. The train rattled forward, the passing landscape a blur of green fields and towering mountains. After countless cups of instant noodles and fitful naps, we approached my destination. My grandma used to share tales of her childhood adventures in the West. She would describe the wind-swept plains, the crystal-clear streams, and the warmth of the community. It was time to fulfill her dream. As I disembarked, my phone buzzed. It was Victor. My chest tightened, my pulse racing. "Jessica, where are you?" he demanded, his voice clipped and irritated. "I'm leaving," I replied calmly. "Let's get a divorce." "What are you talking about?" he scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous." In the past, I would have crumbled, begging him to reconsider. But those days were gone. My grandmother's words gave me strength. "Lucas has been crying nonstop. He wants the special porridge you make." Victor's voice wavered, his tone becoming soft. He realized I was being serious. "It's over, Victor," I said, my voice calm and measured. "I've already signed the papers. They're on your desk." His facade crumbled. "Jessica, do you really think this is the way to get my attention? Is this what you're trying to get me to do?" He raged, his voice laced with fury. "After all of those times I've been with you, you don't think I realize this is a joke? 6 years together, and he still didn't understand. The divorce papers are signed. Goodbye, Victor. Don't forget the prenuptial agreement, Jessica," he spat. "You won't get a dime. Money. That's what he always thought drove me. But it was never about the money. It was about the love I never received, the family I never had." The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Before he could respond, I ended the call, cutting off his words. His ego didn't need to hear anymore. The world quieted, save for the occasional voice message from my son. His messages transitioned from demands to pleas, ending with heart-wrenching cries for me to come home. I listened to each message. His voice grew sadder and sadder with each message I received. He asked me for a lot, but I gave them a final glance and promptly deleted them. Let him and Victor figure it out. As for Victor, I knew he was waiting for me to come crawling back, begging for his forgiveness. But this time, there was nothing to go back to. I was done. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, a suffocating burden I had carried for far too long. Leaving them behind was the hardest decision I had ever made, but it was also the most liberating. I was finally free. In the following months I taught children to read in a small village school. Before I knew it, it was New Year's. The village chief invited me to his home to make dumplings with the children. Despite the scarcity of resources, they slaughtered a pig and brought out their most precious things to treat me. Amid the children's laughter, the phone rang, vibrating in my pocket. It was Victor. Chapter 5. I answered, and there was silence on the other end for a long time. A dry, hoarse voice finally came through the phone. Happy New Year. The sound of fireworks drowned out his voice. Just when I thought the call had been disconnected, the man spoke again. He cleared his throat, sounding somewhat uncomfortable. "Grandfather wants to see you." "Didn't you tell Grandpa about our divorce?" I asked in return. "Jessica, the company is about to go public. Can't you think about the bigger picture? So that's how it is." "No, I can't. You were the one who said from the start that this marriage was a mistake. Now I don't love you anymore and I don't want to continue." I spoke decisively. 6 years ago, a marriage contract bound Victor and me together. I should have realized from the start our marriage wasn't because he loved me. It was for the sake of family cooperation, and no matter how much favor Emma had in Grandpa's eyes, she was still just an intruder. When the family needed me again, they came looking for me. I never wanted to get involved in anyone else's relationship, and I wanted to leave it all behind. But Grandma got sick and needed money, and my so-called biological father threatened and coerced me. The night before I left with Grandma, they drugged the milk I drank before bed. That was the night Victor and I ended up in bed together in a haze of confusion. Perhaps the memory stirred something in Victor and his voice grew angry. "Jessica, there was no need to continue this conversation any further." I was about to hang up when I heard Lucas's voice, nasally and urgent, calling Mom. His tone was rushed, filled with anxiety. Seeing that I didn't respond, he awkwardly added, "I'm sick." In the past, whenever he got sick, I would be frantic, staying up all night to care for him. But now I only responded with a flat "Oh." "Mom, when are you coming back?" Children can't hide their emotions well, and Lucas's voice began to quiver with tears. "Mom, why aren't you answering my messages? It's so cold out here." "Lucas, come inside," came Emma's concerned voice. So the divorce wasn't even finalized yet, and Emma was already spending New Year's at their house. The cold winter wind stung my face, making me want to go inside. "I won't bother you anymore." "Wait," Victor hurriedly explained. "She came on her own." So he's capable of giving explanations now, huh? But before, when I agonized over these little details, Victor would just watch me fall apart, calling me a madwoman. "Mom, Dad, and I got you a birthday present," Lucas's innocent voice chimed in. "A birthday present, huh? That was half a year ago. I found it while sorting through clothes tucked inside Victor's suit jacket pocket. It was a necklace encrusted with gemstones. I thought it was a surprise for me, so I pretended not to know. But I waited and waited. In the end, I only saw it worn around Emma's neck. Back then, perhaps I was heartbroken, wronged, and deeply saddened. But now when I think back, it feels as if I'm just a bystander, completely at ease. As Lucas cried and complained, all I felt was irritation. First of all, I'm not your mom anymore, and secondly, if you're sick, there are doctors. Coming to me won't help. Chapter 6. Time flew by, and after the spring festival, the children returned to school as usual. During the lunch break, I patiently braided the hair of each little girl, holding their hands and organizing them to go downstairs for lunch. "Teacher, what are we eating today?" "Today we're having..." Just as I reached the staircase, a voice stopped me. "Mom." It was Lucas. He had grown taller. But he no longer had that arrogant air about him. He just stared at me blankly. I chose to ignore the desperate longing in his eyes. "Teacher, who is he?" "Don't be silly, she's our teacher, not your mom." A mischievous boy spread his arms wide, blocking Lucas from approaching. Perhaps Lucas had never been treated like this before. His eyes reddened as he looked at me like a frightened little rabbit. I turned away and led the children downstairs. "Is everyone hungry? Let's go eat first." Yes, after serving food to the last child, I felt a small hand tugging at the corner of my shirt. Lucas rubbed his grumbling stomach and spoke in a pitiful voice, "Mom, I'm hungry." "If you're hungry, go eat something." For a child to come all this way on his own, Victor had to know. So I continued singing nursery rhymes with the children and soothing them to sleep. During this time, Lucas stubbornly stood by the door. It wasn't until one of the children had a nightmare and woke up crying that I hurried to hold and comfort him. Don't be afraid, it's just a bad dream. But Lucas rushed over and pushed the child out of my arms. It was the first time I had seen him behave so poorly and emotionally. He had always been strictly taught mature and smart, knowing how to please others in every way, behaving like a little adult. But he had always been cold and distant toward me, his mother. "I'm so hungry, Mom," he raised his voice and repeated himself. Afraid he would wake the sleeping children, I walked over and handed him a bowl of porridge. Lucas's eyes immediately lit up. He took it and started eating quickly with big spoonfuls. But in the past, no matter how much love and care I gave him, it was all ignored. Lucas was born premature. The night I had a difficult labor with him, Victor was abroad attending an art exhibit with his first love. Having almost lost him, I held my frail baby in my arms and swore to give him the best of everything. I learned all kinds of recipes just to make sure he had the right nutrition during his growth. No matter what I did, he would only eat a little. His face remained expressionless, neither liking or disliking it. Once he finished eating, I pulled him aside. "Why are you here? Does your family know?" He raised his eyes, nervously playing with his fingers, finally mumbling in a low voice. "The school is having a parent-teacher meeting and a parent needs to attend. You should talk to your dad about that. I'm not your mom anymore and I'm not obligated to attend." I squatted down to meet his gaze, and I could see the tears welling up in his eyes. After all, he was still a child, and he finally broke down crying. "Dad says he's busy. And am I not busy too? I gave up my entire career for this family. When Lucas first started elementary school, I went to attend a parent-teacher meeting. The moment he saw my unadorned face, his expression immediately darkened. At the end of the day, he endured the mocking gazes of other kids as he pulled me toward the door. Frowning with those eyebrows that were strikingly similar to Victor's, he showed the same disgust. "All the other moms are so beautiful. What else can you do besides cooking at home? You really embarrass me." That look, it was identical to how my biological parents sized me up when I first returned home wearing rough, cheap clothes. It was exactly like that time I first went to a Western restaurant with Emma. She acted spoiled and Victor naturally cut the steak for her, handing it over with a loving smile. Two worlds separated by one table. Awkward and clumsy, I tried to copy him, using the knife and fork with all my might to cut the steak. But with the wrong posture and too much force, there was stubbornness in my heart. He wiped the corner of Emma's mouth, then happened to look up. Just that one glance, it was like a balloon being pricked, and all my forced strength deflated into embarrassment. The plate overturned, sauce dripping everywhere, a complete mess. Victor handed me a napkin. I made an excuse to go to the restroom. Just a few steps away, I heard Emma's tearful voice like an anxious little rabbit. "Victor, are you going to be taken away by her too?" I instinctively froze in place. Victor's playful tone disappeared, and he made a serious promise. "Little Emma, I only love you." As for her, if it weren't for Grandpa's instructions, I nearly ran away in panic. Because only by doing so, by not hearing those piercing words, could I pretend not to know. At 18, I was proud yet insecure, eager to please everyone, just hoping for a little love. At 25, when new life was born, my world began to revolve around Lucas. Now I live for myself. Chapter 7. Seeing that I didn't respond, Lucas went from crying loudly to silently shedding tears. When the lunch break ended, I continued teaching as usual. Lucas sat quietly in the last row, listening attentively. It's almost laughable, there was a time when I would tutor him. Back then, he would only coldly push me away. Dad said he'll hire a top school tutor for me. After the lesson, it was time for exercises. The children occasionally raised their hands to ask about their opinion homework. Lucas raised his hand too, looking at me eagerly. I deliberately ignored him. He borrowed a notebook from someone else, holding his pencil tightly as he approached me. "Mom, I don't know how to do this." His poor acting was so obvious it could be seen through at a glance. I didn't say anything and took the pencil, showing him how to do it on the paper. Thank you, Mom. He smiled sweetly. When I looked up, I saw Victor. I didn't know how long he had been standing by the window. When he saw me, his lips parted slightly. I ignored him, pulled the curtains, and continued helping the children with their homework. By the time class was over in the evening, it had started to drizzle. After sending each child home, the sky had already darkened. When I returned to the school, my colleague Luis handed me an umbrella with a smile. He and I were the only two teachers at this school. This was his 5th year here. Let's walk together, I invited. Jessica, you've worked hard. We were worried at first that you wouldn't adapt to this place. Of course not. As your senior, I can't afford to fall behind you. When I first found out that Luis was my junior at university, I thought it was a funny coincidence. We joked and chatted along the way, and soon we arrived at the teacher's dormitory. Suddenly, Lucas ran under my umbrella. Mom, you're back. Rain had soaked the hair on his forehead. After a full day of being bothered by him, I was tired. I didn't respond and turned my head inside. Jessica, are you refusing to come back because of this pretty boy? I turned around. Victor had just gotten out of the driver's seat and was standing in the rain. Luis looked uncomfortable because of Victor's words. I responded with a cold smile. Do you think everyone's like you, sneaking around with other women during their marriage? Victor froze at my words, stunned. His emotions began to escalate. You're really going to stay in this dump and abandon me and our son? Jessica, you have to explain yourself to me today. All right. Some things indeed needed to be cleared up. Victor followed me into the dormitory. Father and son looked awkwardly around the cramped room. Exhausted after a long day, I poured myself a glass of water. Just as I was about to drink it, a large hand gripped my wrist tightly. He used his free hand to shove his phone in front of me. It was a photo of Luis and me playing with the kids during class. The picture was taken recently when a journalist came to interview us. There was nothing inappropriate in the photo. And so I looked at him as if he were an idiot. Victor, in a fit of rage, pinned me against the wall. You mean I can only bring it up if I catch you two hugging? How fragile and suspicious he is. Oh, so when it happens to him, it actually bothers him, but when he and Emma were caught in close photos together, traveling intimately, whenever I showed any discomfort, he would accuse me of overreacting and being dramatic. Victor, after the divorce, we'll live our own lives. You won't meddle in mine, and I won't interfere in yours. Isn't this the freedom you wanted? He glared at me, his eyes bloodshot. In the next moment, he flipped me onto the bed, pinning me down. My ankle was touched. He pulled a Band-Aid from his pocket and carefully applied it to the back of my heel. His movements were quick and precise, so much so that it left me momentarily dazed. You were hurt. At this distance, I could smell the scent of his clothes. The pine-scented cologne tickled my nose, making me sneeze. Are you sick? He asked, genuinely concerned. But it was like talking to a wall. We were together for 6 years, and every time I asked him to change his cologne due to my allergies, he ignored me. Because Emma liked it, Victor never changed it. So now I didn't need this superficial concern either. Get out. After kicking them out, I finally got a good night's sleep. Chapter 8. For the next 2 weeks, Victor didn't leave. Sometimes he would sit in front of his laptop working. One night I heard a knock on my door again. Mom, I'm scared of the thunder. It was Lucas. In the past, whenever it rained, I would hold him and soothe him to sleep. But this time I ignored him. With Victor around, he would naturally take care of the child. But the next morning, when I opened the door, I found Lucas still standing there holding his small pillow. When he saw me, he sniffled. After a few days here, Lucas was no longer the clean and tidy boy he used to be. His clothes were wrinkled and there was dust on them. He looked utterly pitiful. I knelt down and told him Victor taught you this, didn't he? Playing the sympathy card won't work. Crying and whining won't get you anywhere. What would a child know if it wasn't for the adults suggesting it? How would he even think of doing this? Furious, I dragged Lucas back to Victor. Because Victor's company sponsored the elementary school, he was quite popular here. The village chief arranged for him to stay in the best house. When I entered, the light bulb was on, casting a dim orange glow. Victor was on the phone, frowning as if something wasn't going well. When he saw us, he rubbed his temples and immediately hung up. There's an issue at the company. Lucas will stay with you for now, I said bluntly. Take care of your son and don't let him bother me again. Lucas immediately started crying and throwing a fit when he heard my words, refusing to leave. I used to feel sorry for you, but not anymore. Tears only matter to those who care about you. In the end, Victor, growing impatient, urged them into the car. I thought that would be the last I saw of them. But during class, I received a call from Victor's grandfather. He sounded anxious. Jessica, has anything happened to Victor and Lucas? I heard there was a landslide. Grandpa had been kind to me, and his only beloved grandson was here. At this moment, I couldn't bring myself to tell him about the divorce. I simply reassured him, don't worry, Grandpa. Out of gratitude for his kindness, I went to check on Victor. As soon as I stepped into the village clinic, I saw Victor lying on a stretcher. The moment he saw me, he tried to get up. Jessica, I knew you still cared about me. I pressed his shoulder down. If you don't want to die, don't move. Where's the doctor? There was only one doctor, who was busy tending to other injured people. I grabbed some gauze and started bandaging the bleeding areas. Are you a doctor? Someone asked curiously. I got injured on the mountain once. My leg was almost broken, but I fixed it myself. Even the doctor was surprised, I joked with a smile. It happened during Victor's company retreat. After dropping my son off at kindergarten, I rushed over only to see Emma sitting in the passenger seat. They were laughing about something funny. That whole day I was stranded on the mountain, injured. When Victor arrived, the first person he carried on his back was Emma. His voice was filled with concern, overflowing with tenderness. It's okay now, don't be scared. He gently patted her back, comforting her. Emma cried out in pain. I stood quietly to the side, so quiet I was almost invisible. Victor seemed to only just notice my presence. For a moment he looked conflicted, but when he heard Emma's muffled groan, he quickly made a decision. I'll carry her down first. Jessica, hang in there. He hurried down the mountain, never once looking back at me or noticing how pale I was from blood loss. Hang in there. In his eyes, I was always the one to be abandoned. I didn't feel the same sense of hurt and grievance as before. Now the nurses around me were amused. I've never seen a patient so good at healing themselves. You might just take my job, one joked. I casually responded to the doctor, remaining calm. Only Victor's face grew darker and darker. Finally, with a hoarse voice, he spoke. You were hurt back then, I didn't know. I thought you weren't seriously injured. I cut him off. It's all in the past. You asked me why I can't forgive you. I'll tell you now, every time you chose to abandon me. As I spoke, Victor's face turned whiter and whiter. Chapter 9. The family soon sent someone to pick up Victor. Lucas cried out, Mom, come home with us. Of course I had to go back, to finalize the divorce. Since I couldn't communicate with Victor, the first would speak with Grandpa instead. Grandpa, it's time for this marriage between Victor and me to end. You know, a forced marriage will never be sweet. Hearing my words, Grandpa began coughing violently. Jessica, did that boy do something wrong to you? Grandpa immediately grabbed his cane, ready to strike him. You little brat, did you wrong her? Victor knelt on the ground, silently taking each blow without saying a word. Watching this scene, I finally spoke. Grandpa, I'm the one who wants to leave. I handed the bank book and card I had found to Victor, but he refused to take them. In the end, I placed them on the table. This is the money you sent me all these years. I didn't spend it, and I never accepted your so-called compensation. Back then Emma had taken my painting and entered it into a competition, afraid I would expose her. Victor used his influence to send me abroad, perhaps as a way to keep me quiet. Over those years abroad he transferred money to me every year. He stared at the card, looking stunned. Then all these years, how did you, in those years in Paris? I worked 3 jobs a day, washing dishes, doing anything I could. No matter how hard or poor it got, I never touched that money, because once I did, it would mean accepting that so-called compensation. I wasn't wrong, and you know the truth better than anyone, don't you? You ruined me so terribly. What makes you think I would ever forgive you? I hadn't intended to cry, but the surge of emotions made tears fall uncontrollably. Grandpa, just learning the truth, clutched his chest in distress. You ungrateful brat, how could you destroy Jessica like this? I'm sorry. I'll repay everything I owe you. Victor's voice choked with sobs, and he looked utterly pained. A few days later I understood what he meant by repayment. Victor publicly exposed Emma's plagiarism to the media. With the evidence complete, she fell from a renowned artist in the industry to a notorious plagiarist overnight. Chapter 10. On the day I left the city, Emma found me. In the bright, spacious cafe, she had lost her usual radiance. I ordered 2 cups of coffee, and when the waiter brought them over, she smiled and pushed hers away. I'm pregnant, and I'm afraid it's not good for the baby, she said. Unlike her usual arrogance, I saw a hint of anxiety and fear in her attempt to boast. Oh, then I wish you and your family of 4 happiness. The blessing slipped out of my mouth. This time it was genuine. But Emma's expression changed suddenly. Turning around, I saw that Victor had appeared behind me without me noticing. He picked up the steaming hot coffee and poured it over her head. It was the first time I had ever seen her so disheveled. Victor, how can you do this to me? For her, she was in such pain, unable to understand why the man who once unconditionally adored her had vanished overnight. After Emma ran away crying, Victor called after me. Jessica, the child she's carrying isn't mine. She's lying. There's nothing between us. He went on and on, trying to explain. I glanced at my watch. I have a flight to catch. I'm leaving. You hate me so much that you have to leave. In that moment his posture collapsed like the life had been drained out of him. You're overthinking it. I don't love you, but I don't hate you either. I cut him off sarcastically and got into the car. Victor's car annoyingly trailed behind mine the whole way. When I was about to pass through security, I saw him standing at the departure gate with Lucas frozen in place. A passerby asked to borrow a pen, and I casually handed one from my bag. No need to return it. Thank you. He rushed off, excited and hurrying to catch his flight. Victor's expression darkened because that pen had once been a gift from him. It was back when he was going abroad to attend a summer camp. The traffic was terrible, so I got out of the taxi and ran the rest of the way. Sweat drenched my back. I saw my reflection in the glass. My first attempt at makeup was now completely ruined. Emma, looking polished and flawless, walked over, glancing at my disheveled appearance. Why are you just getting here? The flight was moved up. Didn't Victor tell you? Urged by his grandfather, Victor handed me something hastily. It was just a postcard with a few words, to Jessica. Victor's expression was awkward, and I knew he hadn't prepared anything for me. I smiled and said thank you. I like it. A flicker of complex emotion crossed his eyes, but I didn't pay attention. What was he upset about? Why does it matter if I give away the pen he casually gave me? As the plane took off and passed through the clouds, everything on the ground became small, just like the past now left completely behind. Epilogue. After Jessica left, Victor found her journal in the trash. He realized how she had lived in France all those years. Over time she had gone from a budding artist to making a name for herself in the art world. Strangely enough, even though Victor had plenty of money and time, he no longer dared to seek her out. Because she had once said, "Can you please stop bothering me?" The most out of control he ever felt was when he rushed to the mountains overnight. But he lingered at the door, watching as she laughed and smiled at someone else in a way she had never smiled with him, a happiness she had never had around him. She had painted her experiences there and sold the paintings, donating the proceeds to the children in the mountains. He was the buyer behind the scenes. The village chief had once invited him, saying they wanted to thank him. That day Victor nervously waited, but when he saw her walking out alongside Louise, he cowardly ducked back into the car. "Where's the buyer?" he heard her ask. "He just left," the village chief explained. Outside, the wind and rain were heavy, the air misty. As Lucas grew older, he continued to write letters to her relentlessly. The mountain roads were long, and it took a month for them to be delivered. He would share his life with her. "Mom, I'm doing my homework well. Mom, I started learning piano today." His handwriting evolved from clumsy and crooked to neat and tidy. But not once did he receive a response. The night before Jessica's art exhibition in France, Victor canceled all his meetings. It was an important negotiation, and even his friends called him crazy. He simply asked his secretary to book 2 plane tickets. He and Lucas flew to Paris overnight. It was a snowy day. The street lights flickered on. The man stood silently in the snow, covering the boy's mouth. They were standing in the corner facing the glass window. Inside was the painting, depicting a family of 3 all smiling brightly. "So this is how it was, so this is how it is." His heart felt like it had a gaping hole with a blizzard sweeping through it. From then on, the person he loved was gone like the morning clouds, never to be found again.